Hello, everybody. Welcome to this gardening workshop at the University of Miami. And thank you for joining. This is Earth Week. So we have a lot of events packed up this week, and today especially 50 years anniversary of Earth Day. So this is something special. And one of the reasons why we have this workshop today is because people are interested. People are interested in especially in this strange, challenging time we're living in, about being a little bit more independent in terms of food, and about they want to learn about growing their own food. So we gathered a group of experts. Maybe they don't want to be called experts, but they're either gardening at their house, it's their job, or they're teaching it. So we have four panelists with us today that I'm going to introduce in a second. Just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping rules. You will be able to ask questions at the end. We'll have 10 minutes for Q&A. And to do that, you have a little button at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. It's live. You can use it. The chat is disabled, but the Q&A is live during the whole webinar. So you can definitely ask questions anytime. We'll address them at the end. So to simply introduce our panelists before I let them talk about what you're interested in, their plants and their garden. I wanted to quickly introduce them to you. So we'll start with Dr. Terry Hood. She's a senior lecturer in the College of Arts and Science Department of International Studies. She's also the co-director of the Ecosystem Science and Policy Program. We'll have also Richard Weiskopf, professor and chair Department of International Studies at the College of Arts and Science. Kathleen Sullivan-Seeley, also associate professor of biology in the College of Arts and Science at the University of Miami. And someone from the community that we really thank to be here today, Dylan Terry, is the CEO of a local nursery called Ready to Grow, and he'll let us know a lot more about what he's been doing for several years now in Miami-Dade. So the reason why we're here today is it came from this kind of a question that I had from many of you. So I'm going to introduce the topic and then ask Kathleen probably to start. COVID-19 has made us really aware of the fragility of the system we're living in, the economic system, the globalized system we're living in. So many people realize that not counting on massive imports of goods and trying to produce locally might be the best way to prevent hardship. I'm not talking about food, I'm talking about in general goods. But it's also true about food. Even though it's harder to be independent, it might help actually to prevent hardship. It's definitely also something that it's worth mentioning in regards to the climate crisis that we're living. We tend to forget that right now because we're in the middle of a public health crisis. But that it's especially true regarding the food distribution system. A project like Drawdown from Dr. Paul Hocken has listed the solutions to climate change, solutions on how to mitigate carbon emissions. And among the 15 top ones, you have urban gardening. This is something interesting. This is something that's been advocated for a long time by local urban farmers like Dylan and many others. So my question to the four of you, and starting with Kathleen, that will have also a little video on her garden, she'll comment on that. the question is, do you agree with that notion of urban gardening being able to tackle both the public health crisis and the climate crisis? And what is your take on this? Kathleen?
Thank you, Teddy. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I am going to show you a little video of my backyard. I live in a townhouse. I originally lived in the Florida Keys and in the Bahamas, so I'm used to growing some of my food. And I would suggest anybody who gets into this, the good book to read is Barbara Kingsolver's book, Animal, Vegetables, Miracles. And in this book, she describes her family trying to live on everything they can raise, for a year in Tennessee. And I would just point out, as you go through the video in my garden, even if we could raise a small amount of our food, we would increase our quality of life and increase the quality of our diet. So I'm not sure that we could be totally self-sufficient. I'm mostly vegetarian on a lot of plant-based diet. I belong to a community-supported agriculture group, but gardening in Florida is hard and hot. So I'm just gonna give you a video, show you a little tour of my garden, and talk about how I would start. I think the thing to do is start small, gauge the amount of work you want to really put into the garden, grow things that you love and can enjoy every day, and barter or trade. And you'll see what that means when you see some of the things in my garden. Let me share this video.
So Kathleen, your video is not showing up right now.
Oh, here, sorry.
For my homeowners association.
Let me start that over again.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Seeley, and
How's
this
that?
is my garden.
Oh.
I live in a small townhouse with a very limited garden space, but I make the most of the area that I have. And I also plant a lot of trees out in the common area for my homeowners association. You can see that my garden has a lot of ornamental plants, but small fruit trees like this black sapote tree, which has delicious fruit. I make sapote bars. And I have some raised bed gardens, which I plant various things in. For the past 2 years, I've been growing a type of dwarf plantain. You can see the plantains are just now ripening now. And the raised bed has allowed me to build up soil through composting for growing a variety of crops. Let me show you some of my favorite plants in my backyard. One of the plants that I'm growing to put out in the common area is a gnip tree. I grew this from seeds. The plants I probably use the most are aloe. The aloe is important for teas, and I use it a lot in skincare. I've cleared out this part of my raised bed for the summer to plant out pigeon peas, and you can see the seedlings going, and also moringa trees. I've planted a number of moringa trees around my neighborhood, and people like to make teas out of them and eat the fruits. You can see how productive the plantains are. Another plant that I use a lot, lemongrass or fever grass. I harvest this regularly and get fresh grass growing. This is the most aromatic, and I regularly cut and prune this grass to keep vigorous growth. You can see some more aloes, some small native trees. I have a lot of unusual plants that I inherited from my daughter, like this pitcher plant and orchids that I take care of. And of course, I love the butterflies. Here are the butterflies on my passion flower. They've really defoliated this now. One plant I couldn't do without is my rosemary. I'm constantly harvesting the green tips of this plant for teas, spices, marinades, and just to make my house smell fresh. I have small pots of herbs like parsley that I use regularly, and wild sage. I use this sage in marinades as well. I have two ways of dealing with waste in my house. One of them is the rabbits. Here's Snuggles in his house, and his brother Ara in his house. They take care of a lot of the scraps from my house. In addition, I do thin layer composting. Here's the necklace pod that I've grown from seed. Again, another butterfly plant. On my little succulent box, again with lots of aloe and aloe tips that I use. And then the table I really use for cuttings and growing plants that I'm trying to get to flower. So this is my garden, a very small space. I tend to go towards plants that aren't too much maintenance. Come October, I'll start planting arugula and kale and other plants. But for the summer, I'm just going to do with my pigeon peas and plantains.
So that's like my little mini garden. And so like I said, I think that, you know, urban gardening can take a lot of time. If you really want to just get some herbs, some fresh green material into your food, then just focus on a few things. And I'll just say that I grow a lot of plantains. I trade them with friends of mine that have mangoes or sapodilla trees. So you can barter things that you grow. I think the important thing is to start small and start with something manageable. You can't plant everything that you might plant up in a temperate environment. A lot of crops, the squashes, tomatoes, they don't do well in the summer here. So really a lot of the leafy green things that I grow from seeds, you'll start in October. So that's my garden.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was really great, actually, to invite you in your home like this. It's inspiring because, yeah, it's not only food, it's a lot of herbs also. I was beginning this webinar with this workshop with I mentioned the fact that a lot of people are asking how to grow their own food. A lot of people don't know exactly how to start a garden. And that's why, for instance, people like Dylan, Terry are here. But I just sent on Instagram, Plant-Based Cane is a student organization at who, as the name indicates, is a plant-based organization that promote vegetarianism and veganism. And they're doing like a cook-off Instagram show in a second, like in an hour. And I shared a dish that I just prepared with pigeon peas, guandules, that I grow in my garden. I do it in a very lazy gardening way, and I think Terry is going to tell us a little bit more about that. It's called permaculture. I'm not the expert, but I need to ask Terry because Terry and Richard, Terry Hood is professor, Richard Weisskopf also at and they've been instrumental in starting a garden at the university. It's called the Sustainability Garden. And they're gonna let you know a little bit more about that. So I'm gonna start with Terry. Terry, this is, we started with this really broad question, which is basically how can local farming, local urban organic farming like the one we promote in the Sustainability Garden at the U, help with both the public health crisis that we're living right now. There's a lot of links. We know that deforestation is linked to the food distribution system. We plant a lot of soy to feed the animals that we grow. And that is one of the reasons why wildlife is spilling over those viruses. And it's also a really good way to limit our carbon emissions. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and let us know about this great initiative that we have at UM in terms of gardening?
All right, thank you, Teddy. Hello, everybody. So like everybody else who's involved today, I'm very enthusiastic about sustainable gardening, about edible landscaping, all these different ways that we can manage the part of the environment that's under our direct control in a much better way. So I'm gonna cut to a few images because I'm much better at showing than I am just telling. Let's see. There we go. Can you see that? There are a lot of different ways in which doing some edible landscaping or growing your own food can have surprisingly far-reaching positive impacts. So for one thing, this statistic here on the lower left is one that I always find astounding. Average food item travels in the US 1,500 miles from where it started to the supermarket that you pick it up in. This is, for example, the case when we get grapes in the winter. We have grapes in the winter because they come from the southern hemisphere. So anything that you harvest out of your own backyard, you are not using any fossil fuels to bring it to you. Also, you're basically harvesting from an area that you were already cultivating. So you're not putting pressure on natural ecosystems to try to support you, which basically means taking over natural ecosystems. How do I do the next one? Uh-oh, how do I go to the next slide? It's not going. Oh, there we go. Another really enjoyable aspect is that you can pick your own varieties. So I personally could care less for those square tomatoes that are rather tasteless in the grocery store. The ones that are on the left-hand side, those are largely used because they ship so well. But when you look at all of the varieties that are possible for you to grow in your own space, you can pick ones that have all sorts of different flavors, that are more vitamin packed. All sorts of different choices are available to you. And then another aspect of eating locally, and this is not just what you grow in your own backyard, but making an effort to buy produce from nearby. One side effect of this is that it makes a higher proportion of your diet seasonal. Here on this image, this was created by the Miami Culinary Institute, and you can look at it at your leisure later, but it's got a lot of information about what is being produced in our area normally in any given month. And once you're growing things in your backyard, this naturally becomes part of your own personal life cycle. And one of the positive benefits of this is that it gives your body a break from the same old things that you would otherwise pick up at the grocery store every day of the year. And then in addition, there are other physical and mental benefits of getting out in the garden. It's a great whole body workout. You don't have to worry about targeting your core because your core will get targeted if you're out there. And then it connects you to the natural world around you. A lot of times people think they have to go out to the Everglades if they want to have a nature experience. But what many people don't realize is that nature is happening in your own yard every day, all day, but often we don't see it because we vector ourselves from the house to the car to work, to the car to the house. So it's actually just there waiting for you. So here is a picture of the main part of our backyard. And I'm bringing this up because for most of us who are rather busy in our day-to-day life, I think that having an edible landscaping approach to gardening makes a lot of sense. The last thing you want is to come home from work to work. So the idea here is that you incorporate edible aspects into your yard, into the area that you would be taking care of anyways, in a way that doesn't create more work for you. And often people can think that when you do that, you're going to create an orchard, or you're going to create, you know, what looks like a market garden, which you can do if you like that look, but you definitely don't have to. So this is the main part of our backyard, looking in from the front gate. And I think it looks kind of like a normal backyard, your average backyard. It's got a central grassy area surrounded by edge plantings, a couple island plantings. But in that area, these are some of the main edibles that are in it that I harvest and that we make use of. So if you look back, they're kind of wonderfully hidden. They're wonderfully incorporated. But when you go wander the garden, they're always there waiting for you. And another thing I want to point out is that if you do edible landscaping, it doesn't mean you have to compromise other goals in your yard. About half of the plants in our yard are there specifically for wildlife. So one of my personal favorites are hummingbirds. I'm crazy about hummingbirds. And incorporated in the yard are a whole number of nectar plants for them. So pretty much from the beginning of October till the end of March, whenever I'm out in the garden, I have hummingbirds zooming around me, and I don't have to have a hummingbird feeder. I don't have to do anything else. They come of their own accord because the plants they want are there. Also pretty passionate about our local butterflies, and again, just incorporating their plants in amongst the edibles pretty much guarantees that when you're out doing your harvesting, you're also having wildlife experiences as well. And then this speaks to something that Kathleen already mentioned, which is you don't have to have a lot of space to have a productive space. This is in a back corner of the yard that was previously just grass and hedge. And the little island planting you see there is about maybe 15 feet across by 10 feet deep. And I chose to put almost all edibles in it. These are the ones that are currently in it, but that center one where the pomegranate is, the pomegranate also shares space with a major hummingbird plant, the Chinese hat plant. So for example, when my head is down below the Chinese hat plant picking cherry tomatoes, often I will have hummingbirds zipping around my head. So Teddy also asked us to come up with our three what we think might be most useful pieces of advice. So I'm just going to go ahead and share those before turning the discussion over. In terms of what you should plant, my recommendation also, as Kathleen said, plant what you most like to eat. I'm a real mango fan. Plant what's hardest to get locally to buy. So longans are often difficult to get, and I like those. I also like to plant things that I kind of choke on the price out there, like jackfruit. You know, you can spend $30 on a single jackfruit, and our jackfruit tree, the tree itself costs me $40, and it produces 5 or 6 fruit a year. So I don't have to worry about that price. And then another important aspect, and this is again mirrors something that Kathleen said, which is you want to create a garden structure that doesn't become too much work. A couple of key aspects for me are mulch and ground covers. Because nature abhors a vacuum, you've heard that saying, and weeds will grow anywhere that there isn't already some sort of competition. So I also use mulch in a way that does not create work or cost. We never buy any mulch, for example, from Home Depot. We use a lot of leaf drop mulch. So we have oaks in the front yard. And in February and March, if you have oaks, you know they drop all of their leaves in large amounts. And our lawn care helpers, God bless them, instead of blowing our leaves into the street and into our neighbors' yards, they rake them up and they mulch with them. And I also use what we in class refer to as ugly mulch, where the trimmings from your plant you can use directly as mulch in beds that aren't really visible. Bananas in particular love to have their own leaves decomposing around their feet. Another aspect, once you've actually succeeded in creating a productive space, is that you can let yourself become overwhelmed with the work of harvesting them and using them. For example, our starfruit tree produces enough starfruit for about 10 families. And so anytime early on when a tree or a bush started becoming really productive, I would kind of go overboard in trying to freeze them and dry them and do everything else I could with them, way more than we actually needed. So I learned to just share those things and trade those things and compost those things, and don't create more work for yourself. And then my last piece of advice is to remember that you are actually just part of the ecosystem, and you can learn a lot from it just by being there. So I always walk through the yard in the morning, and I walk through the yard in the evening, and see what's going on. And that's when I have most of my wildlife experiences. Right now we have warblers migrating through. And then on the bottom there, this is pictures from my Sunday morning wander. I picked cherry tomatoes, and in my Sunday evening wander, I picked Suriname cherries. So for me, the best garden is one that I just get to be that gatherer that wanders through and enjoys the wildlife and reaps the benefits. So I think that's plenty from me. I'll turn it back over to Teddy.
Thank you so much, Terry. That was really amazing. And it's true. I couldn't say it better. When you start gardening, especially this kind of edible landscape she was mentioning, you see all the benefits coming in. It's not only the food, the well-being, the wildlife. You see things happening in the garden every day, new things, and that's something that I love too. That's why I follow their example and have what we call a permaculture kind of edible landscape in my own backyard. That's kind of the pattern also that we followed at the U with the sustainability garden that both Dr. Hood and Dr. Weiskopf started. And so that's what Richard Weiskopf, who's going to be talking in a second, has been doing for several semesters now. Has been addressing something very important right now. It's food insecurity in his class, and one of the way to do that is actually to show students how difficult it is to grow your own food. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. And Richard, don't hesitate to let me know when you want to turn the page. You have to unmute yourself, and you can start talking.
Okay, I'm unmuted. You hear me? Okay, and I'm working hand in hand with Teddy. He's going to show the slides. Some of them might be on their side, so you have to bear with us, and we'll get everything right. And maybe the order will be out of order a little bit, but we'll see. First, we're going to start with we have maybe 25 to 50 students a semester that are interested in this kind of thing. The first is a ground plan. is 25 students. It looks like a bunch of keyholes, which is one technique of gardening. And there are 25 students totally. Each one has an area around the keyhole. And the purple area on your left is, over here, is the common area that everybody will share in. So people are responsible for their own gardening land and the common land. In the next slide, we're going to show how simple it is to do this. Part of my motivation was that I have a front lawn that I was tired of mowing. And it seems the university has a lot of lawn that gets mowed and fertilized and pesticided, and you can't really, it's not safe and it's not healthy. So this is what we're starting with. Note the two dumpsters in the background. That is the destination of that plan that I just showed you. So this is what it is. It's beautiful lawn, nice lawn. But in the next picture, we're going to take it over for one semester. Aha. Okay, so this is, oh, you'll notice the first technique is the cardboard. Instead of digging it up and tilling it and turning the soil over, which isn't very deep in this area anyway, we're covering it with cardboard, and it's all brown, it's not colored, and it's going to decompose, but this is, we're laying it out. The cardboard is all from the university. We went around to the dumpsters and we pulled out the cardboard and laid it down, and the class is working there. I'm in the green shirt with the hat, and all the others are students who were laying it out carefully. And the next picture, we're going to get some, we have to cover it with some things and it's going to be dirt that we're going to have to buy. And this is really the hardest part, because the truck will come, it'll dump a whole lot of dirt somewhere, and then we have to, with wheelbarrows and shovels and rakes, take it so that although it looks like it's very shallow right now, it's going to be up to our knees in dirt. So we're going to make a raised bed on top of the cardboard. Then we're ready to go. In the next picture, we're going to add some fertilizer to it to make it a little bit richer, because the dirt that we have up at, okay, and then, okay, in this one, what we've done is we've added some fertilizer and we've raised it a little bit. There's a space in between and it's high. And we have a path, a stone path on the right side and a very narrow path on the left side. And we've planted some little seedlings and we're ready to go. That's the chemistry lab in the chemistry annex in the background. Again, this is the very same piece of land next to the dumpsters. Now things are going to get growing. So let's see what happens. There's a problem with water because the university didn't connect us. We didn't have any, so we have the nearby lab gave us water that we connect with hoses from their faucets. And fortunately, during the rainy season, there's no problem. The dry season, the chemists are very happy to contribute some water. And this is what you have in 2 or 3 weeks. This is a one semester project. We've got to get the ground cleared, covered, grown, and something harvested by December or by the end of the spring semester in this case, before the students go home. Okay, so now things are growing. That's the path that we saw before, and things are emerging. In the next picture, we'll see what's going to happen. Ah, yes, this is the happy harvest. You see, let's see. So there's a lot of joy in this kind of work, especially when you're harvesting things and you're I don't know, you can eat right out of it, but most of the students have no farming background, including the professor who's involved with this, and we just want to see how this thing works. In the next picture, we now have next thing we have to do is, I think we want to pose for everybody in front. Now, in back of this picture, on the left side, on your left side, you'll see the dumpster that we started out with, and that's Camposano building in the background. And behind us are the bananas, and there's going to be a lot of large greens and small greens in the front, and that's the class. We call it a global student farm, and this is our work. It's almost ready to harvest, but we have another few weeks to go. The next picture, we're going to eat something, I think. Let's see what's going to happen. Okay, because growing is one thing, and then enjoying it is another. So, yes. So the university has what's called an instructional kitchen. Now you put 25 students in a kitchen and you see what happens. So some people have never cooked in their life. Other people are really expert cooks and they learn from each other. but everybody joined in. There's only one person sitting down. Everybody's in the kitchen. And this was the most enjoyable part. Most of everything on the table is what we grew. It's also what people brought in from their homes. Okay, in the next picture, we have the final. What do we have here? Screen, okay. Aha, this is a toasting to the class for having worked hard from nothing to at least something edible and fun and learning while doing it. So then in the next, I think I have a few more slides I want to show you of some other ideas. This is an annex to that one. As a part of this course, since we want to work with professionals, so we went to a farm that allows us to work for a whole day with their farm workers. This isn't near Clewiston. So here's on the right side is one of our students, on the left side is a full-time worker. We did this for maybe 2 hours in the hot sun. It was exhausting. And the man on the left, he works full-time from dawn until dusk during the harvest season. It's radishes. So we worked, and our contribution was to give them our quota and help contribute to their quota in radishes. So that's a little about seeing how it's done commercially and not just on an artisanal basis. In the next picture, let's see what we have. Yes, this was our guidebook. Perennial vegetables was the whole idea, following on what the other speakers have said, is if we do perennials, you plant them once, you don't have to worry about them every year. So most of the vegetables that you and I eat are from the more temperate climates, and so you have to plant radishes and carrots and lettuce and all this stuff every year, every season. And here, the growing season in Florida is 12 months, so why not use it? So this is a book that we use as a guidebook for ourselves, and Eric Toinsmeyer was here for a workshop. I attended it, a week-long workshop, and it changed my whole orientation, that you could actually make one planting and then continue to harvest it over the next years and take care of it. But it's not like the old-time gardens that I was used to, is where you work hard, you plant it, and then it goes, you have to do it the whole thing all over again. I think, is that the end of the slides on that, or are there any more?
Thank you so much, Rich. That was also like a brief overview, but a really cool overview of what you guys have been doing in the garden. That was actually the first phase that Richard launched. How long ago was it? It was 2 years ago, right? The first garden.
Actually, I was looking at that. It was the end of 2000. It was the fall. No, the winter, December was the 2015. It was actually 5 years ago. And since then, we've made 3 gardens on this campus, mainly because we don't have a home until very recently with a more permanent. That first, the whole area I showed you was lent to us by the Arboretum on the condition that we be out within 48 hours, that the Arboretum's new greenhouse would be broken ground. Well, that took 3 years for them to get the permits. So we were there for a number of years. Then we moved to another area that the Arboretum generously gave us. We were there for 1 year, and then we moved into what's now the sustainability area behind the chemistry building. So we've had to do this process you just saw. We had to do 3 times over. The latest one was a few months ago when I brought back from Puerto Rico a number of like 2 corn cobs full of corn seed. Right, we seeded it. We planted them in a little cedar, and we had 75 little sprouts. What do you do with 75 corn seeds, right? So we planted them in a vacant area in the Arboretum, and then we were told that, oh, that was the wrong place we planted them. So we transplanted them. Where was the only place available? The worst land behind the sustainability area. It was a parking lot with no soil, no nothing. Okay, so we said, we're experts at this. What we showed is that you could take the worst land, or unusable land, and with cardboard and soil and fertilizer, you could make something, and a mound, you could make a mound and plant our 50 to 75 corn sprouts there, which I haven't seen them in the last 2 weeks, but my students say that they're growing. So they should be ready in 90 days to get some corn. Well, we'll see if that corn seed will work in Miami. I hope so.
Yeah, no, that's pretty amazing. Before we start asking the expert, because he's been dedicating his life to this, I wanted to go back to Terry maybe. Thanks, Rich. Terry, you've been also instrumental in getting this sustainability garden, the arboretum started. Could you give us? We're going to have actually an event on Friday, or we're going to celebrate Arbor Day, because it's really the day of the arboretum. But and you'll be there. You'll join also. But could you give us a little bit of background about this sustainability garden in the arboretum project?
Yeah, so as Rich indicated, both he and I have been teaching in that space. And the idea is to demonstrate in a relatively small space a number of different sustainable gardening techniques. So Rich's area is the global farm area, which focuses on mostly on subtropical and tropical perennials. In the area that I teach in, we have an area called Sustainable Suburbia, which focuses more on the model like in my yard. We also have the trial beds, which are designed so that every semester you can try something new in a trial bed and different instructors can use them. We have one that we did a square foot garden this last semester, where every square foot has something different growing in it, and that's an example of very high diversity in a very small space. And we also just started, which kind of got cut short with our COVID response, a new slow food arc of taste garden. If you're familiar with the slow food movement, trying to get back to eating natural varieties of culturally significant foods. And they have something called the arc of taste, which are types of plant-based food that is in danger of going extinct because nobody's growing them anymore. So these are all just some of the different things we explore there. We build soil from recycled materials like the coffee grounds from Starbucks, and we use rabbit manure from a rescue that's run by another faculty member, banana peels from the farmer's market. So all different fun things for the students to learn about trying in their own personal space.
Yeah, no, it's amazing what you guys have achieved in a few years, and also bringing all those disciplines together. Chemistry, biology, international studies, geography. It's pretty amazing. Going back to this idea of making a really productive area, no matter the size. And I'm thinking about people living in an apartment, for instance. You can still have a lot of things growing and very productive with a very limited space. That's the kind of challenge that Dylan Terry has been facing, because it's been his job for many years now in Miami-Dade. The company is running is both a nursery and kind of a school where it teaches how to grow your own food and make your own garden. So if someone has a lot of good advice, is Dylan for sure. He's been helping us actually, both Dr. Hood and Dr. Weisskopf with some advice when we started the garden. So Dylan, you've been involved in making gardens in Miami-Dade for Miami-Dade residents for a while. What are the most challenging cases you've encountered, and can you give us some tips, some advice?
Yes. So thanks for having me, by the way. The main challenge that people have is not paying attention to sunlight. So sunlight is basically what plants need to grow. And there are some plants that'll grow well in the shade, but many plants, especially fruit-bearing plants and many vegetables, need a full day of sunlight. So that's probably the first challenge that people have, is not really understanding how the seasons work and how the shadows change based on the season. So if you're growing a garden for the winter, you want good exposure to the south. Otherwise, having the garden placed in an area close to a kitchen is good because you'll end up using it more. And, you know, just an area where you'll see it more often, and also be like having it close to water or a source of water to be able to water it, or an irrigation system. If it's okay, I'm going to start a quick presentation. I'm not going to get through everything, but I'll go into further detail. This. Okay, so growing food in South Florida. This is what we do full time. We specialize in growing food and helping people do it throughout the year in South Florida. Oh my gosh, I can't do this. Can anyone?
If you want, Dylan, I can try to share your presentation, and you just let me know. You know, tell me next slide, and I'll do. Ah, you're able. It's moving. So apparently you. It's moving.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Because I think you did it several times, and the computer's, you know, maybe slow, and so we have all the slides coming in. Let me share the presentation, and you.
Okay, I can do it. I think I can do it.
You can do it. Okay, I'll let you do it.
Can you see?
Not now. You have to share it.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess you should share because it stopped sharing.
Okay. Don't worry. Let me make sure. And that's, you know, people are used to the Zoom now. We know that it comes with some hiccups sometimes. And by the way, I'd like to thank someone here that you don't see in the background, Brandon from the IT crew. Those guys are magicians. They're the one making all this possible. And obviously, when we have computers, depending on the connection we have, sometimes it's harder to follow through. But I'm gonna be able to share with you in a second. So then, Dylan, you let me know when I need to switch the. So let me know if you can see the screen.
Okay, switch. And the first slide seemed to have a problem. So yeah, this is our nursery. We grow lots of veggies. So if people want a head start, they can come and get some plants from us. And we also do classes there. Next. So why grow your own food? Obviously, as it's been mentioned, food security and safety, reduces fossil fuels, lower environmental impact, great exercise, therapeutic. It's fresher and often tastes better, especially with mangoes, tomatoes. They're worlds of difference. It can reduce and replace ornamental landscaping that you'd otherwise be mowing or tending to anyway, or hiring someone to tend to, and it can be a very social thing as well. Next. So one of the first challenges that people have is not understanding the seasons of South Florida. You know, most people read gardening books and then they read that you plant in the spring and harvest things in the fall and summer, and here it's reversed. But it depends. For a lot of the popular veggies, they need cooler weathers. So here you plant them in the fall, harvest them in the winter and in the spring. And then in the summer, you have to plant things that are more tropical, more heat tolerant. And many of those include tropical fruit trees, and many of the perennials are more heat tolerant as well. Next. So yeah, when you plant an edible garden, you need to have a site that has good sun, good water, and good soil. You want it to be both rich and well draining. Light is the most important thing. So having at least 6 to 8 hours of direct light. If you want to grow a garden in just 3 or 4 hours, you can really only stick to like herbs and some leafy greens, but many of the plants just grow a lot faster and are healthier with more light. And having access to water is important. Younger plants need to be watered more frequently than older plants that have deeper root systems. And also being able to understand that our soil is naturally kind of infertile, and it needs to be improved by adding organic matter, compost, mulch, plants that fix nitrogen. So all those things contribute to building healthy soil. And as I mentioned, planting close to the kitchen helps. And if you plant in the front yard, it can be a more social thing, and interacting with neighbors, and that can be fun. But you can also have it be a more meditative and practice of solitude. And if you plant it in your backyard. Next. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to do a garden. You can have like an annual garden, like that's traditional with straight rows and beds, and that's very efficient if you're trying to grow a lot of annual vegetables. But you can make raised beds. There's definitely a lot of benefits to raised beds, especially since our ground is really rocky here, and but you can make them out of all sorts of materials: wood, brick, stone. You can also make planting areas that curve. You can have pathways be more narrow, so you can maximize the growing area, or you can have them be wider so it's easier to walk through. Food forests are gardens that mimic nature, and you have a lot of different sizes of plants that have a lot of different functions, and you can also incorporate plants that are, as Terry mentioned, good for wildlife and feed wildlife in addition to feeding us humans. So there's a lot of different ways to start crops. You can plant them directly into your garden. Some crops are easier than others. You can also start them in another place. Okay, in a more protected location, or you can get them from a local nursery or farm. But as was also mentioned, by Richard, perennials you won't have to get over and over again. With annual veggies, you'll have to repeat the cycle of growing them from seed over and over again. So to maximize sun exposure, you can plant taller things in the north end of the garden and lower growing things on the south end of the garden. And that way you don't have so many shadows blocking out the sunlight from other crops. Next. Younger plants need more water, and then mulching helps with watering and weeding. And of course, if it's raining a lot, you won't need to water, or won't need to water very much. If you're harvesting herbs and leafy greens, if you harvest too many at once, you can put your plant into shock. So it's usually good to harvest 30 or 40% of the leaves, like kale, and then you can keep on harvesting those leaves throughout the season. And with kale, you harvest the lower leaves. With certain plants like basil, it's good to harvest the growth tips and encourage bushier growth. Some plants need trellises. And then there's a lot of different ways to manage pests. If you don't do anything, you will often have beneficial insects coming in, or birds, helping keep them in manageable levels. But you can also remove them by hand. You can remove affected leaves and branches. You can spray them off with a hose. So there's a lot of ways you can do it before resorting to other sprays, even if they're organic sprays. So, and another thing is, if you have a pest issue, a lot of times it's a symptom of the garden just not being healthy and to begin with. So, getting enough water, getting enough sun, getting enough nutrition in the soil, all those factors can lead to plants being more inviting to pests infesting them. Next. So this is how we do raised garden beds. We use reclaimed wood, reclaimed from local dock pilings that come from the ocean. It's very durable, but this is just one way to do it. That's Natalia, she's building a trellis, and Chris is probably working on irrigation. Drip irrigation is a way to have less water evaporate into the air. Next. This is a garden that we've done at Vizcaya. It's just an example. There's a lot of different ways to design a garden. Next. This is one we did at Coral Gables High School, used by the Culinary Arts Department. So you can use wood, you can use coral rock. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Next. This is an example of a food forest showing a mango in the front and bananas in the back, and you can also incorporate annuals like tomatoes into the food forest, as well as herbs like Cuban oregano and tarragon and other plants that are better for the lower understory like sweet potato and pineapple. Next. That sweet potato, they're a lot of fun to harvest. You have to dig them up, but anyway, they're a good crop for the summer here, but they do take over a lot of space. So you need to make sure you give them enough area to really spread out. Next. This is a close-up of just some of the greens you can grow. Probably my favorite green to grow is kale. Dinosaur kale is the one on the right with the bumpy leaves. It's supposed to look kind of like dinosaur skin if you could imagine it. Next. Cucumbers can do well, but they're more tricky. They're not one of the easiest crops to grow, but they can do well here if you're planting them at the right time and have good luck and can manage pests and keep them healthy. Next. These are a couple really good ones for the summer that are really easy to grow. Cranberry hibiscus is the one with the red leaves that has a tangy cranberry flavor. Cuban oregano is the one in the front with the white edge of the leaf. That can be more like an ornamental, so you can use it, you know, as an ornamental plant in your landscape, but still eat from it. And then we have peppers in the back. Those look like cachucha peppers, which are probably, those and other types of ají dulces are probably the easiest peppers to grow. Next. This is an example of a harvest from the summer garden. Of course, mangoes do great here. So I recommend if you like mangoes and if you have space, people should plant more mango trees because they're a great crop. And there's a lot of amazing types of mangoes. There's like 1,000 kinds of mangoes. Next. Yeah, here's an example of like a winter harvest. You can grow most veggies here in the winter, but in the summer it gets too hot for many of them. So you need to really just be in tune with the seasons and grow things based on the seasons. There's a lot of good charts for that. University of Florida has some good ones. If you type IFAS, Vegetable Gardening Guide, that's a really good one. Next. This is an example of a jackfruit tree. This is probably the most loaded jackfruit tree I've ever seen in Homestead. And yeah, it's an amazing tree that can produce a lot of food, and more people should be growing jackfruit as well. Next. Here is just an old company portrait. Trying to look like superheroes, but anyway, we are kind of a little bit sometimes, but yeah, anyway, next. Yeah, so we do classes at our nursery. We didn't do that many this season, kind of cut short by the virus, but maybe we'll do more Zoom meetings or classes. So this is my first Zoom class. It's fun. And yeah, another harvest picture. Passion fruit's a really good one, but it needs a good trellis. You need to, yeah, grow it on a fence or have a tree that it can grow into, but beautiful flowers. Example of a summer harvest. Tropical fruit do great here. Also hot peppers. And yeah, you know, other animals can enjoy wildlife, can enjoy edible plants as well. So yeah, thank you.
All right, that was amazing to see all the diversity, because it's true. Our region is the breadbasket of the United States during the winter. That's, you know, if you go to Homestead, have a lot of growing going on. So it's interesting to see how I wouldn't say easy, but possible it is to grow your own food, any kind. You make the difference between annual and perennial. Just in case our attendees don't know, could you just clarify, Dylan, between annual and perennial?
So annuals are basically plants, doesn't have to be an edible plant, but just plants in general that only have a 1 year lifespan or less than a year lifespan. Occasionally there are some annuals that can somehow live for over a year, but usually they don't. When perennials, on the other hand, will grow for multiple years. Sometimes, many years, so fruit trees can be considered perennial. And there's also many perennial vegetables, as Richard showed in that Eric Toensmeyer book, Perennial Vegetables.
Thanks for clarifying. There's something also that I noticed in your presentation, Richard's presentation, and Terry and Catherine also mentioned it, is the fact that in our region, soil is an issue. Sun is not. I mean, during the summer, it can be really harsh, but soil is an issue. We don't have a lot. I heard someone say once that you don't need a shovel in Southeast Florida to garden. You need a pick, because you need to pick the ground. There's not a lot of soil. It's true. So you can bring soil, like the example Rich was giving. You can create soil like the one Terry was giving. You can also, at a very small level, do composting. You mentioned it, adding a lot of organic stuff. So we have a question from one of our attendees to Kathleen, actually. So Kathleen, if you want to take that one, and maybe we can rebound on composting in general. So the question is, how do you do the thin layer composting?
Well, that's a good question. You saw those two like Rubbermaid containers out there. I try not to put anything organic in my trash, and I recycle. So I tear cereal boxes. I take all my vegetable cuttings. I take the newspaper from the rabbit cages and all the rabbit poop. And what I do is I layer it in those boxes. So one I fill up, and once it's full, I water it and let it sit and decay. And then the other one I'm filling. So that's why I have two. So one is sort of sitting, composting. The other one is being filled. And those are the sizes that work well for me. But the thin layer is I use cardboard, grass, food. So you have to be very conscious of what you do. Instead of turning it over, I'm always adding things in layers. So I tear up cardboard, and that's what I call thin layer composting. We've done it a lot on industrial processes, like in processing food waste, but it's layering the brown material, the high organic material, and the green material into layers.
Thanks, Kathleen, for the clarification. Also, I know that in the Sustainably Garden, Rich has started also, we have different kind of composting going on, but Richard started a special kind of composting. You want to say a few words about that, Rich? You have to unmute yourself first.
I'm reluctant to say anything because we haven't proven it to be successful or unsuccessful yet. But it's the idea of using kitchen scraps from our own kitchens and our own, wherever the department have people left over, have food scraps, and adding something that would help in decaying, like a bacteria that's anaerobic and aerobic. And it's a mixture that we purchase commercially. And it's very inexpensive, and it's a little bit like making kombucha, to drink. It's that kind of principle. But I don't know whether it's going to work or not. So I'm not going to say anything more about it, but we hope it will.
Right. Thanks. I know that something that works is a kind of soil building that Terry has been using, a technique. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, Terry?
Well, we take a number of different types of organic components to add to the soil. One of the ones we use is something called hugelkultur, which is burying pieces of rotting wood, decomposing wood deeper in the soil. They kind of function as a sponge. Normally when it rains, the water just seeps right through the soil and goes down into our bedrock and out of the root zone. It's no longer available to the plants. So when you have these chunks of rotting wood that is under the soil surface, they absorb the rainwater and then they release it slowly. So that's one of the things we do. We also, in situ compost in a way that I learned from my grandmother, which is you take your fruit and vegetable peelings and, you know, your nut shells, husks, and banana peels, and you just dig a hole in your garden and you cover it up with soil and mulch, and you let the soil community come have its way with it. And the little shredders will shred it up like the roly-polies, and then the you know, the bacteria and the fungi get in there. And so we just try to use the natural processes that would occur without our help, but we help them.
Yeah, no, and that's very inspiring to realize that, just like Terry was mentioning, Dylan, sorry, was mentioning with how to fight pests. There's a lot of ways to do it naturally without having to spray, without having to add chemicals. So I have one last question from one of our attendees. Right now, it may not be the perfect time to plant. We're in a drought season, but if you want to start eating natural, organic fruits and vegetable, what farmers market or stores that you can order from and have delivered at your house would you recommend? I know that it's a really strange era we're living in right now. So obviously you cannot go to any farmer's market. You cannot go, you can go to a grocery store, but the best is probably to have it delivered if you can, obviously. So do you do your groceries, or do you order from a specific area? Dylan, you want to answer that?
Sure. I don't know the specifics for all of them in terms of how it works, whether I know some of them will deliver and some will offer like curbside pickup where it's just ready for you and you just pick it up. But I would start with Urban Oasis Project. They're one that I'm pretty sure is still selling. I'm not exactly sure the specifics. There's also one called LNB Grows. And they have a lot of fruit and turmeric. And then there's also Little River Cooperative, and they have a lot of vegetables at this point in the season. Yeah, grown mostly by local farmer Chris French, who also works with us at Red Deer Gardens. So,
I know that you're connected with the whole local farmers community, so definitely a good tips. We've been working with the Urban Oasis for a little while, and Art is a great friend. And yes, they are actually delivering, or they have a system in place in this COVID-19 time where you obviously you have to respect social distancing. Last thing, Dylan.
Bee Heaven Farm. I forgot. That's another one.
That's definitely another big one. So with this, we're gonna have to say goodbye to all our friends. This is we're actually over time. So thank you all for joining this webinar. I hope you learned something today, and that you'll start your own garden very soon. And if you have any questions, this recording will be, this webinar will be recorded and put on the website, miami.edu/virtual Earth Week. And there's plenty of resources. Reach out to the University of Miami, and we'll put you in touch with the panelists to give you more resources and more information. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. And have a great Earth Day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.